Hello, welcome to our workshop today on getting asylum based on your LGBTQ identity. I'm really excited to do this workshop in honor of Pride Month and the many LGBTQ clients that we have. We love working with LGBTQ clients, and we've done a lot of asylum cases for people who fear persecution based on their LGBTQ identity. So today I will go over what asylum law is and how you can get asylum, the general requirements, and then we'll go specifically into how you can get asylum based on your LGBTQ identity, after which we'll discuss some specific case scenarios of different countries and cases that we've done, and then address any other questions that you have that we haven't addressed. So let's get started. So what is a refugee? In order to get asylum, you have to establish that you meet the definition of a refugee. A refugee is defined as anyone who is outside of their country of nationality, so the country where they were born, where they have citizenship, or if you don't have a country of citizenship where you last resided for a significant amount of time and have some ties there. And this person, they have to be unable or unwilling to return to their home country because of past persecution that they faced, or a fear of future persecution on account of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. So this is a very stacked definition, and there are key elements to it. So I'll go into it a bit more to help you understand exactly what it means. So the first important part is that you have to be outside your country of nationality. You can't apply for asylum in the United States if you aren't already in the United States. So you have to first be here in order to apply. That's really, really important. Then the second part is that you can't return, or you are unwilling to return because you're afraid to go back. And then you have to be afraid to go back because of something terrible that happened to you, harm that you faced, or because you have a legitimate basis or reasonable basis of fear that something dangerous is going to happen to you, or your life will be threatened in some way. And you can't just be afraid because you're generally afraid. You have to be afraid that something will happen to you because of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a social group. So these two things have to be tied together. Just general fear isn't enough. It has to be on account of one of these 5 things, and that's really, really important. So the next thing is, you have to apply for asylum within 1 year of coming to the United States. If you don't apply for asylum within 1 year, you have to meet an exception. So an exception could be that there are changed circumstances in the law in your country, something happened that now makes it dangerous in a way that it wasn't dangerous before. Or there's something that changed in your life that now puts you in danger that before didn't exist. Or it has to be some exceptional circumstances beyond your control, which you had nothing to do with, and that could be a possible exception to the 1 year deadline. But generally, the recommendation is once you're here in the United States, you have to apply within 1 year, or if you're in a legitimate status, you have to apply within 1 year of that status ending. We already discussed the fact that you have to be afraid and unwilling to return to your country because of past harm you faced or future harm. And the fear of the persecution has to be something about yourself that you can't change. So race, nationality, political opinion, belonging to a social group such as gender, your identity, your sexual orientation, identifying as LGBTQ. These are things that you can't change about yourself, and you fear persecution because of these things. And the other thing that is on the burden of the government to establish is that you won't be safe if you go to another part of your country. So let's say you're from a particular city in your country and it's dangerous for you to return there. If it's possible for you to go somewhere else in your country, then you may not be granted asylum. So you have to be demonstrated that there is nowhere else in the country that you can go. It doesn't matter what city you're in, your life will be in danger because of these things about you that you cannot change. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 5 grounds of persecution: race, religion, nationality, social group, and political opinion. First, let's define what persecution is. Persecution is defined as mistreatment that is inflicted either directly by the government or indirectly by individuals that the government cannot or will not control in the form of threats and or abuse of human rights and civil liberties. So let me talk a little bit about persecution. So persecution has to be something inflicted on you by a group that the government cannot control or is unwilling to control. So let's say there is some other group over there that the police won't do anything about. You try to file a police report, but the police will not protect you. That the government cannot control or they're unwilling to control. Or even if it's something inflicted by the government, in that case, it's even stronger if it's coming from the government. So keep in mind that for past persecution, it's okay if you haven't been beaten, physically assaulted, threats, inability to get a job, housing, discrimination. All of these things can go into a discussion of the persecution that you faced. And then future persecution, you can establish that with country conditions, and we'll go into evidence a bit more later. And then remember, the persecution has to be by a group that the government cannot control or is unwilling to control. So now let's talk about social group. What is social group? Social group is defined as a group that shares a common immutable characteristic, is defined with particularity, is socially distinct within the society in question. What does that mean? So it means that you are a member of a group, so other people who share something in common with you. A good example is gender. Gender can be a social group. So let's say you're a woman in Ghana, or you're a woman in Ecuador. You're a woman in a country where you are treated a particular way just because of your gender. That counts as something that is unchangeable about you and something that is particular and that everybody in the society can see that you belong to. So if you're a woman in a society that gets treated a certain way, that meets the definition of a social group. Another example is, let's say you belong to, you identify as LGBTQ. That also constitutes a social group because it's something about yourself that you can't change and that somebody else can tell you belong to that group. And that's something that's distinct within the community. People can tell that that is a specific group and you belong to it. Another example could be, let's say you belong to a specific tribal group in your country. So let's say you're from Ghana and you belong to the Chamba group. That's a particular ethnic group and they have particular rituals and observations and customs. And based on those customs, somebody can tell that this person specifically belongs to that group. So there are a variety of different definitions that will meet what a social group is, but essentially you have to demonstrate that you belong to this group of people, that somebody can identify that person as belonging to that, and it's socially distinct, like there's something about themselves they can't change and people in society can tell that they belong to that group. Let's talk now more about the benefits of asylum before we go into getting asylum specifically based on LGBT identity. What are the benefits of asylum? So the first thing is that when you file for asylum, you can get a work permit while your case is pending. So after submitting the asylum application, most likely you will not get scheduled for an interview. So the law may change, but currently you wait about a year after you file the application, and after you filed it, You apply for work authorization and you can stay and work in this country while that application is pending. Previously, you would be able to apply for a work permit within 6 months. After 150 days, you can send out the application and be eligible after 180 days. So that's 6 months of sending your asylum application. But last year, the law was changed to make it a year, and some other requirements were added. But the key point is that regardless of the amount of time you have to wait before you can apply for a work permit, that is a benefit that is available to you, which is great because it means that you can earn an income, be able to provide for yourself, and if you have any dependents while you wait for this application to be pending. The other great thing is that when you file for asylum, you can include your spouses and children in the asylum application. So if your spouses are here, you can include them. And let's say you apply for asylum and you're single and then later you get married, you can also include them up until the interview. And if you get married after, you can always have them get asylum as a derivative. So your spouse and children also get the benefits of asylum, which is a really great benefit to have. If you do get asylum, you can apply for your green card 1 year after approval. And that's the best benefit because it means that you can get permanent residency in the United States. And then after 4 years, this is really, really nice because we add the extra year of waiting between when you get your asylee status and applying for the green card to meet the 5-year USCIS requirement for citizenship. And to explain that further, what that means is instead of waiting 5 years after you get the green card, you wait 4 years, and that 1 year between getting your asylee status and being able to apply for the green card, that gets counted in the 5-year requirement. So that's a great benefit for you to have. And once you become a citizen, then of course you get all the benefits of being a US citizen. And finally, and most importantly, one of the key benefits of getting asylum is that you will be safe from the harm that you fear in your home country. And essentially, this is the key point of getting asylum, right? So that your life is not in danger and you can stay here and be safe. So let's talk about identity. What is identity? Identity is who we are. It's something unique about us. There isn't a universal definition. There are many factors that go into our identity. Our gender, our religion, our appearance, our sexual orientation, so many different things go into it. And it's different for everyone. And that's why it depends, on how you identify yourself. And one of the things that's really important is sexual orientation, right? These are characteristics that you can be persecuted for. So let's say you're in a country that has a particular religion that doesn't approve of homosexuality. In that country, you could face persecution because of your sexual orientation, and if in particular you identify as LGBTQ. So this is the whole basis of our workshop today, talking about your identity when it comes to your sexual orientation and falling within the category or group of LGBTQ. There are many people who identify as that, but they grow up not being able to come out and say that they like someone of the same gender, or that they don't fall within the traditional norms of particular identities related to their sexual orientation and their preferences for the type of relationship that they want to be in. And these people who identify as LGBTQ, they face persecution because of that. And this is something that is common in many countries and is well documented. And the thing is that you can get asylum based on identifying as LGBTQ if you do come from a country where there are laws, there are cultural norms, and other societal norms that place you in harm because of that part of your identity. So what are the key requirements of getting asylum based on your LGBTQ identity? So let's talk a little bit about what's really important in applying for asylum based on your LGBTQ identity. One of the first things that you have to do is you have to establish that you actually do identify as LGBTQ and belong to that category. What does that mean? That means that you have to submit affidavits from other people attesting to you coming out to them, or their knowledge that you belong to this group, um, or that you're in a relationship and your partner writes an affidavit or they testify to that. It could also mean that you've attended certain events, such as like the Pride parade. That's something that you can use to establish that. The key thing is that for asylum, you have to establish your eligibility for the group on the count of which you are claiming asylum. So it's not enough for you to just say that I identify as LGBTQ. This doesn't mean that you have to take some sort of physical test or something like that, and the result says that you belong to this group. Not at all. It just means that with circumstantial evidence, like affidavits, testimony from past partners or current partners, your participation in LGBT groups, organizations, etc., you demonstrate your relationship with this community and that you belong to it. And that's really, really important. You have to establish that. The second thing that you have to establish is that you are going to be in danger because of that LGBTQ identities. So you have to establish that there's a reasonable fear of harm in your country due to your LGBTQ identity. So how do we establish that there's a reasonable fear? The best way to do this is by country conditions. So it's really, really important that with your asylum application, you document what's going on in your country in terms of how people who identify as LGBTQ are facing persecution. Are there laws in your country that explicitly state that people who identify as LGBTQ will face punishment or penalties, or be treated a specific way that's unfair? How does the society respond to these things? Generally, there are a lot of cases of people who have already faced persecution in the country, and the best way is looking at the news. A great example is Russia. Putin all the time is very publicly against LGBTQ, against the LGBTQ community. There are laws against it. Another example is Uzbekistan. There's specific laws that discuss this. So if you go and provide documents about the country's sentiments on LGBTQ people, where the law stands on this, and examples of other people who've already faced persecution, that's a good way of documenting that you have a reasonable basis of fear of facing persecution. And then of course, if you've already faced persecution, if you've been threatened, you have been attacked, and other forms of harm, you were forced to leave your job. All of these things create a reasonable basis. And then what does it mean to have a reasonable basis? This is a legal term that's used often. So reasonable basis means that someone in your position, it makes sense for them to have that fear. So if I have been attacked, if I know that there are laws in my country that say that because I identify as LGBTQ, I will face certain penalties. If I have friends who have been attacked because they're LGBTQ, and I know and I read in the news about all of these things, then it makes sense that I am worried that I will be attacked. It's a reasonable basis. It means you didn't just create this out of thin air. There are actually documented reasons for you to be afraid to return to your home country. So then next is, what are some tips and strategies for a strong LGBTQ asylum application? We kind of discussed this a little bit before, but let's go into it. The most important thing is providing evidence that you identify as LGBTQ, that you have been targeted because you identify as LGBTQ, and your statement, your story, okay? So let's talk about your declaration. Your declaration is really, really important. It's one of the key components. We might discuss this a little bit more later, but the declaration sets up the scene for the USCIS officer for why you're afraid to go back to your country, how you came to discover you were LGBTQ or you came out, different things about yourself when you started to realize that you fell into that category or identified that way. And then discussing how other people treated you because of it, any harm that you faced, anything you know about other people in your home country who faced or whose lives were in danger because of that, and then what you think will happen to you if you go home. So these are the things that you want to discuss in your declaration. That is the most important part of your application. There are other things that you can include. Police reports. It's really important to establish that you went to the police and that they either didn't help you or wouldn't let you take a police report. And if you are fortunate to be in a country where the police did actually file something for you, or that at least you were attacked, please include that with your application because that is a very strong piece of evidence. Additionally, if you are attacked, if you are harmed, take photographs, submit the photographs. If you still have the physical markers of past injuries from these attacks, take photos of that and submit it. If at the time you took photographs, submit those photographs as well. Or if you didn't, whatever you have now, like let's say you still have a mark or something, take a current photograph of that. So photographs are really, really powerful. And then supporting affidavit. It's very, very important that you submit supporting affidavits from other people. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. So supporting affidavits play a key role in your asylum application, especially if you don't have other evidence of facing actual persecution, such as police reports, medical reports, hospital records, if you were injured and went to the hospital. Affidavits of support from friends, family members, both in your home country and in the United States, who've gone through the same thing, who know about what happened to you, who face threats, or somehow are related to your asylum case, can really make your asylum case much stronger. It's important to have supporting affidavits that are detailed, that talk about how they know you, that they're aware of your LGBTQ identity, that you faced harm, or that they themselves identify as LGBTQ, they faced harm in their same home country, or know someone else who has. Because these things that they state in the affidavit will provide support for your claim and help to establish that, one, you do identify as LGBTQ, other people are aware of it. There's a reasonable basis that you will face harm because these people are talking about it and attesting to it. And it also helps to make your story much more clear. And if there's specific events or past persecution you faced, supporting affidavits from people who know about that will help to establish the credibility of what you've written. So it's really, really important that you get supporting affidavits and make the affidavits good. Sometimes there are some countries where people are not able to notarize the affidavits and they're afraid because if they go to notarize them, they might face persecution. It's okay if you cannot get those affidavits notarized. You can have the affidavits sent over by email, and if you can have them sent in by mail, that would be great. The important thing is that you do get supporting affidavits from other people. And, if somebody is worried about writing an affidavit because their life will be in danger, you can let them know that this will be confidential and only the USCIS officer will be reading this. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can also include hospital reports, doctor reports, any other communications that you have, and any other proof, including country conditions. We kind of discussed this before, articles about what's going on in your country, all of these things to establish that One, you belong to the LGBT community. You've faced harm already because of your identity as LGBTQ. And the country conditions that there is a reasonable basis for you to return because of what's going on in your country, how society there views LGBTQ people, and establishing what the government's position is on this situation. So we kind of talked about the declaration already. So remember, you need to include basic information in the declaration: your name, date of birth, address. Provide the background information on the conditions in your country of origin and its history of LGBTQ persecution. When you're talking about your past incidents of persecution, make them very detailed. Provide dates and specific events, and then include a summary conclusion establishing why you qualify for asylum. I must emphasize the declaration is the most important, so take your time with the declaration. Let's talk about the interview now. So after you file for asylum, you will be granted an interview with an asylum officer. The interview is really, really important. So what does the interview consist of? When you go to the asylum office, there will be an opportunity for you to review your asylum application and update any changes in the information. And then there is an opportunity for you to tell your story. This is the most important part of your interview, your application, and the whole reason you applied for asylum. And this is your opportunity to tell your story and make sure that all the facts are consistent, that you explain to the officer your reason for leaving the country, why you're afraid to go back. And it's important that you're consistent with the information that you provide. So before you attend the interview, do a practice session with your attorney. Go over your declaration, go over all the documents that you've submitted and your asylum application. Do the dates add up? Are they consistent? That's really, really important. Is there anything else in your immigration history that you need to review? If there is, go over that with your asylum attorney. Is there something that you're nervous about discussing? Are you nervous about talking about how you came out as LGBTQ, the persecution that you faced? If so, discuss these things with your immigration attorney, and they will help you prepare on how to address these questions. So other tips are, giving direct, concise answers. If the officer is asking you some questions and you don't understand, you can always ask the officer to clarify. If the officer is asking you a specific question, give the specific answer. Don't give very broad answers. If they're asking you for dates, give them dates. If they're asking you what happened to you about a specific incident, describe the incident in detail, give dates, relate, were you injured? Were you attacked? Did someone threaten you? If you were injured, how were you injured? Was there a weapon? Did you go to the hospital? Did you stay overnight in the hospital? Did you go to the police? Did you file a police report? What did the police say? What happened after this? Were you more scared? Did you change something about your life after you were attacked? All of these things are very, very important. So make sure you address these things and give clear answers to the officer's questions, and also give a clear account of your story. The other thing is, be confident in knowing your own story. So when you're filing for asylum, you are talking about things that have happened to you. I want to talk to you about this in more detail. So when you're telling your story, you are talking about things that you lived through. These are not things that you're making up. These are things from your real life. So no one knows about these things better than you. However, sometimes people are really internalize what has happened to them, and it's very traumatic, and they are reluctant to share what happened, or they don't know how to articulate it. You know that what you went through is really terrible. Your attorney may know that also, but unless you share that with the asylum officer, they're not going to know. It's not enough for you to say, I'm afraid to go back, terrible things happened to me. You have to tell, you have to show, and you have to tell through your words why you're afraid to go back. What has happened to you that makes you afraid to go back? So you can't say, I'm afraid to go back to my country because I fear I'll be attacked because I identify as LGBTQ. Instead, what you have to say is, in my country, I was attacked. This could be an example. This is an example. I was attacked when I was walking down the street because of the way I was dressed, or because I was with another man. Somebody approached me and started saying certain things to me, and then they harmed me. And they said all of these names, calling me these things because they saw me with someone else of the same gender, etc., something like that. Or at my job, they found out I identified as LGBTQ and started, treating me in a certain way, making certain remarks, or they wouldn't let me work on this project. That's a more specific example. So you have to share these things. It's not enough for you to just say, terrible things happened. It's very important that you go into detail. So let's talk about some of the cases that we've had and some clients that we represented. We have represented people from all over the world, from a variety of different countries, including Brazil, Ghana, Ukraine, Russia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan. These are countries where people face persecution based on their LGBTQ identity because the community is very strongly opposed to it. We've had clients, let's talk about Brazil. We've had clients from Brazil who have faced persecution because of their LGBTQ identity. Sometimes people are targeted just because of the way that they're dressed and they walk. People assume certain things about them, or if they're in a particular neighborhood that's known as identifying as LGBTQ, these people are targeted just for being there. We've had successful stories in establishing how there is strong violence and homicide rates of people who identify as LGBTQ. And over the last few years, homophobia in Brazil has been increasing. And a key way that we demonstrated this is through country conditions, news reports, etc., whatnot, and also affidavits of support from other people who have faced persecution. And we were successfully able to establish that they identify as LGBTQ, that their lives were in harm because of their LGBTQ identity. And it was very evident that if they returned to their home country, their lives would be in danger because of their LGBTQ identity. So I know I keep mentioning this over and over again, but that connection between the harm that you faced or fear facing and your LGBTQ identity has to be clear all the time. Those two things have to always go hand in hand. Other countries that we've worked with, another example is Ghana. So it's a predominantly religiously Muslim country. And there's also there are other religious groups there, including tribal religions, etc., that are opposed to the LGBTQ community. There's a LGBTQ center that opened and was meant to be a safe haven, but instead it was met with a lot of backlash. So Ghana is another example of a country where, there's supposed to be support for the LGBTQ community, but in reality, there isn't. So this is something else to note. If it looks like on the surface there are laws in a country that are supportive of the LGBTQ community, but in reality the situation is different, then that's something you can address in your asylum application. Don't feel like you can't have a strong case just because there are some laws in support of it. You have to look at the actual situation. What's actually happening in reality? Are these laws being followed when they are in support of the LGBTQ community? Or are they just there for the public as just something that's out there to, for publicity rather than something to actually help people? We've also represented many people in Ukraine. Ukraine and then of course Russia. There's a lot of overlap between these countries and the other former Soviet countries. Putin is very publicly against LGBTQ community and have banned same-sex marriages. There's very strong country conditions about this. And, you know, when it is obviously clear that there's a country that's very heavily against LGBTQ, you do have a stronger case of asylum. And let's say you haven't faced past persecution. If the country conditions are very strong, that can be sufficient to get asylum in the US. So we have people who have faced persecution, they were attacked, they were harmed, and we're able to get asylum. But we also have cases where people were not attacked. They came out as LGBTQ, or they didn't come out as LGBTQ, but identified as that and were afraid. And because the country conditions were so strong, we were still able to get asylum for them. And then, of course, I mentioned Uzbekistan. That is another country as well that has very strong country conditions against not supporting the LGBTQ community. So we went over general requirements of asylum. We talked about social group persecution. We talked about applying for asylum when you specifically identify as LGBTQ and what you need to do to establish that. And we talked about some of our success stories and some things that have come up for you to address in your asylum applications. Having said all of that, do you have any questions for me? So when you come to the United States, as I mentioned, you have to file within 1 year of being here, or within 1 year of your current status, valid status expiring. And to put together an asylum application, it could take anywhere from a few weeks to several months. It depends on the documentation that you have, the attorney that you're working with, how long it takes to put together your declaration, get the evidence from your home country, etc. So that time period can vary. Ideally, if you are looking to file for application, I recommend meeting with an attorney as soon as possible and working on the application so that you have as much time as you can get to put together a strong application. Once you are ready and you have prepared your asylum application, you submit it to the asylum office. So in the last year, under the Trump administration, USCIS was prioritizing new applications. So as soon as they were sent out, they were looking to schedule them within about a month for the interviews. Due to the pandemic, the time frame is a little off. And then, of course, we have people who filed for asylum many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, who are still waiting for their asylum interview. So depending on when you're applying for asylum and the administration and how they're prioritizing the asylum interviews, you could get your asylum interview within a month of submitting the application, within a year, or it could be a few years. It just really, really depends. However, while that application is pending, you can apply for that asylum-based work authorization, which allows you to stay here and work here. Race is another basis on which you can apply for asylum. So if you get persecuted in your country because of your race, that can be an actual basis of applying for asylum. But in terms of your LGBTQ identity, it doesn't matter what your nationality is or what your race is. I mean, you could be eligible for asylum based on more than one thing. So if you want to file for asylum based on your LGBTQ identity, in addition to your race, your nationality or something else, you can. You don't have to pick just one ground. You can have more than one ground and basis for applying for asylum. Currently, there is no fee for filing for asylum, and that's great. And the other thing is that first work authorization, the fee is waived when you file for the first work authorization based on your asylum application. So that's really nice. And that's really important too, right? Because if you're fleeing your country and you're coming here, you may not have the means if there was a fee, and we don't want to keep people from filing for asylum, especially if their lives are in danger. All right, so thank you very much for joining us on our asylum workshop on filing for asylum based on your LGBTQ identity. I hope I addressed all of your questions, and we're very excited that you could join us. And I do hope that if you fear returning to your home country because of your LGBTQ identity, that you consider applying for asylum. I invite you to visit our website at www.caligula.com to schedule a consultation with me. I'll be happy to go over your case. We'll look at your background, discuss the potential evidence, the basis of your claim, and help you put together a strong application for asylum. So thank you for joining me. Take care and have a good night.